Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here because this is also my first time to be visiting in Sweden, and yeah, and also it's my first time speaking in person. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to all your support. So today I'm going to be talking about debugging techniques and how you can approach debugging just like a detective. So before going into the topic, let me again introduce myself. So I'm Mariam Reba Alexander, and I'm a software engineer at Maersk, as being introduced. And I have been doing front-end web development for the past 5 years. I started as a self-taught developer, starting working with open source boards like Arduino and Raspberry Pi, and then touching a little upon Android, and then finally I ended up with web development. So this is the current stack that I'm working with. I'm working with Vue.js framework and Jest for unit testing and Cypress for end-to-end testing. So I'm a fan of test-driven development and also automation, and I touch upon a lot of other stack as well, which yeah, there's a lot. So I'm currently working with Maersk.com platform, and I'm working on this particular visibility, supply chain visibility dashboard for the Maersk.com customers. And this is one of the main features that I'm working with, which gives a person can search for their shipment and container and get live geolocations where the shipments are, and also what are the future schedules of the vessel, and also a lot of other information. So I'm originally from Kerala. It's south of India. It's a very beautiful place, as you can see, and it's also called the land of coconuts, and that's the meaning of the name Kerala. And I flew to Denmark 5 years ago with my family, with my husband and my 7-year-old daughter. And I love watching mystery movies. So these are my favorite characters, and I love all the Agatha Christie series. And I love Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, and how they're solving every difficult mystery, and all their observation skills, and how they're deducting and finding out the culprit. So you know why I'm heading on to this story now. It's debugging. Debugging is also if you think about it, it's also like solving a mystery. So and if you look at all these detective stories, there is a certain kind of pattern what they're following. So first is they look for clues. They go to the crime scene, collect and gather some evidences and clues, and then the next point that they'll do is they collect some witness statements. They talk to friends and families, hear what they have to say, what is their story, and from all these stories they find, okay, something is someone is telling lies, or someone is saying the truth. They get some lead from the stories that they get, that they hear. And then the third is, from all the stories that they gathered, they will form a suspect list. Okay, this person can be the possible suspects. And then finally do some sleuthing work and gather more conclusive evidence, and then catch the culprit red-handed. So we can do something similar also in debugging. So the first point is looking for clues. So what kind of clue do you look for usually when you find a bug in the code? Okay, if you're thinking about console errors, that's the first clue that you should look for. So in web application development, always whenever there is a bug, we developers, after years of experience, we just jump right into the code and try do the debugging part without looking at the console errors. So always there will be a clue in the console errors. And the normal suspects which you find in the console errors are type errors, reference errors, script errors, or syntax error, JSON parse errors, or some kind of network request errors. So let me just go through the different examples of errors that you will see normally. And these are all trivial things, but sometimes we miss out to find what the actual thing, and you do a lot of hunting and then come back and find it, oh, it was just an undefined error. And then, so this is one of the error. It cannot read properties of undefined. So it's trying to access a property of an object that is undefined. It looks very simple, but in real world example, you might not, you will have to do some digging to find this. So I have created a demo example. It's using a public API to getting suggestions on what you can do when you are bored. So, and right now, the puppy is lonely, as you can see. The DOM is not loading, and there's also some console errors. This is the same kind of error that I showed. It cannot read properties of undefined, and it's trying to read a property called activity. So let's come back to this example later. The second kind of error that you might see is undefined null is not an object. This is the same error that I showed you, and this happens in Safari. The wording is just different. And this is if the property that you're trying to access is undefined, then it says undefined is not an object. And if it is trying to access a property of null, then it says null is not an object. Another kind of error that you might usually see is script errors. And the script errors you see normally when you monitor the logs. So if you have any monitoring tools like Snook or Datadog, you will see these errors coming up and you have no idea what these are. They're normally anonymous. And when you look at the application, I'm sure that many of you would have seen this error. It's refused to load the script because it violates the following content security policy. So this happens if you are trying to load a third-party script into your application and you have not mentioned that in your content security policy, so in the allowed list. So, and if you look at the code, this is how it may look. Here I have used a meta tag for defining content security policy, and then I'm using some third-party script. And the fix would normally be you will have to include the CDN or the URL that you are using in your application in the allowed list of content security policy. And the second one, and then you also have to mention attribute cross-origin anonymous to fetch the script anonymously. So that you don't pass in any user authentication in the headers when you're fetching this particular URL from the server. Another fix that you can do is server side, and you can add the access control allow origin in the headers. And this is an example how you can do in Node.js, like dot set header and access control allow origin and the domain that you want to allow your script. And this is how you can allow multiple domains. This is just an example. So I also talked about JSON parse errors. So we are trying to parse an invalid JSON. So for example, the first is string. You're trying to parse a string, which is not a valid JSON. Second, maybe you have some properties with single quote, and that's not a valid JSON. And the third, maybe you might have some trailing commas, and then it throws an error. So these are some of the common errors. So the next part of the investigation, collecting witness statements. So what do you do when you what do you do when you're doing debugging? So normally for investigation, you talk to different people, get their stories. So this, what you can do when we are debugging a bug, debugging a bug is you can compare cross-browser. So sometimes certain issues are just browser specific, and you have to check, and it may just need a fallback or a polyfill for the issue to be fixed. Second, you can compare with another system. Probably the issue is happening only on your system and it's not happening on on another system. Third is you can do a git compare and see what new lines you have introduced since your last working version. So the usual suspect, as I mentioned, is maybe some fallbacks or polyfills missing for an unsupported browser feature. Second is you may have um, uh, the Git branch. The branch that you're working on locally might be behind commits. I have seen this a lot of times when you're working as a large team. Somebody pushed some code and committed, another person forgets to pull the code, and then they just start, oh, it's not working, or some. So you have to do every time when you check out, try pulling the latest commits. The third thing might be another issue that I normally see is the package not be updated. Again, when you're working in a large team, somebody has introduced a new package, you did a git pull, but you did not do an npm install, and something is not working, and some errors are happening. So these are some of the approaches that you need to take when you normally do coding. This is another thing that I've seen very often, browser cache. When you're doing actively developing, especially in Chrome, caches heavily. So try to, especially when you are trying to check out a different branch, do empty cache and reload, or you can use Command Shift R to force reload the application. The other kind of problem may be, again, network request. Maybe the API that you're trying to load is giving you some error that you can do, check that. And another thing I have seen is normally if an issue is happening only on your system, especially in production, you might have a token expiry, or you would have opened the application for so long that you have some APIs that requires authentication, and the token has expired, and the UI is not behaving as expected. So, coming back to the next part of the investigation, narrowing down suspect list. Most of the time, in the previous two steps, you might have already found what the issue is, but sometimes it doesn't happen. You might have to dig more, you have to investigate more what's happening, especially when you have a really complex logic. So for that, you can use certain debugging techniques. So one of the method is brute force method. This is, don't be intimidated by these names. These are something which we normally do, put on console log statements randomly in many places to find out where the error is happening. And the second is backtracking. Backtracking is, suppose you have a console error, you would have seen that it gives you an error stack from which line of code the error had occurred. It might emit an error from a particular line, and then you can backtrack from that particular where the error has occurred, and then you eventually it will lead you to the place where the actual issue is. The third is cause elimination method. So sometimes you don't have clues, you don't know what happened. In that case, you will have to do some assumption, presume that, okay, this place or this functionality may be the cause that's the bug is coming from, and then you put again do line by line testing. You have to put some debugging and breakpoints and console, and also check line by line and put some tests as well. And for these techniques, all these techniques you can make use of Chrome DevTools or Edge DevTools, and let me go through some of the common or not common. I want to talk, I know that many of our developers are normally using DevTools in their daily development lifecycle. So I just want to show you certain things that you may not have touched upon. So again, coming back to our lonely dog. So we had this error, right? Cannot read properties of undefined. And if you look at the code, so this is the code that I've created using VJS framework, and there is a data defined called response, and it's an empty object, and we are trying to fetch certain data from the API, and then it's being used whenever a button is pressed, and then we are populating it in the DOM. So you can almost guess what's happening out right here. So let's see we have something called in DevTools there's something called this console utilities API. So this is you can query. So instead of using document query selector and then the element, you can do a right click inspect on a particular DOM element, and then it'll be, you would have seen this $0 in the elements. You can add, if you print out $0 in the console, it will actually print out the element, the last inspected element, and if you can also access all the whatever the document query selector can do, all those functions like text content in HTML, on click, all those you can call on that particular selected $0. And if you are inspecting another element, then that that will become the last inspected element, and becomes $0, and the previous inspected element will become $1. And you can also pass in selectors. So just like jQuery, you can select a dollar, then bracket, then image tag, and then to print out the first image element. And if you want to query, use the same as document query selector, or you can use a double dollar, and then it will give you an array of elements that's matching for that tag. Next is breakpoints. Is again very common. And additional to breakpoints, you can do conditional breakpoints. So that's by right-clicking and edit breakpoint, and then adding an expression. So if you want to pause the debugger in the DevTools, only if a particular condition is passed, or say, an example, you can see if x is greater than 0, or you can put some conditions there, if response dot data something, then only then pause it. So this is an example. So, and you can see there's a different coloring for when it's a conditional breakpoint. Another thing which we normally do, we can do instead of console log, putting console log statements in between the code, is putting a watch. So how you can, here also you can add an expression. You can click the plus icon there and add an expression. You can, in this case, I'm adding response, or you can even add, like, if response.data is greater, this is equal to this, or dot length is equal to 0, or greater than 0, or something. So you can put some conditional statements there to watch, and it will print out every time it pauses there, it will print out what the value of that expression is. So here I have, it's printing out the whole object because I've put the response object there. Another thing that you can do is live expressions. So live expressions is in the console tab of the DevTools, and it's the all-seeing eye that you can see there. Click on there and then put an expression again. So here you can see the live value. So you don't need, you can also put a document query selector of an image, a tag, and then put anything. And also on debugging, it's acts similarly like watch, but it will show the live data that's of live value of the expression. So here I have put response.data. So normally it's again showing the error response not defined. And when I'm pausing the debugger, I can see that only when the API call happens, then you can see the data. So this is the fix. It requires an if statement saying, okay, if response.data, only then populate. So because of the reactivity of view, it will populate it whenever it's available. Another, how do you monitor events? So you can use something called as monitor events. If you want to monitor a window event, you can use monitor events window and then pass in the name of the event that you want to watch. And every time it's triggered, it will print out in the console. And you can do something. So for the button that I have used, I have created monitor events and I'm inspecting the button and passing $0. You can combine the $0 and the monitor events to print out whenever an event is triggered. So if you are trying to debug something on event listener, you can make use of this. So coming to network. So whenever there are a network error or an API, you're seeing some kind of the UI is behaving differently when the network is down, like error 500, you might not have handled it. If you want to simulate this kind of errors, you can right click on the particular request and block the request URL to find out how your UI behaves when it's not working. Another useful thing I've seen is you can save the request as HAR. HAR stands for HTTP archive. You can save the request as a HAR file, and then you can import it later. So this I find useful when suppose your QA is finding a bug and saying, okay, see this data is coming is like this, and the UI is behaving differently for this particular data. It might be useful. You can save the data, save the as a HAR content, and you can import it in your system to simulate the same what the error is. And this is something which I use very often is copying as curl. So you can copy the net request as a curl command, and then you can import it in a tool like Postman to test out different query parameters. So, okay, so if I change this query parameter, the value to this another value, how the API is returning. So for testing purpose, you can do that. And then there are a lot of dev tool extensions for framework specific like Angular, React, and Vue. So you can, those are also very useful if you want to debug. And you can make also use of Git for debugging. So this one way of debugging, I think most developers do that, is by comparing, doing a Git diff with the last working version, see what the new lines of code that you introduced. Second is Git blame. You can see, okay, I see some error in this line. I want to see when it was committed, in which PR it was committed, and who committed it. So you can, in most of the IDs like VS Code, you can always see that who is the last author of that particular line. And you can use also Git blame source script JS or pass in the argument -L to see that particular, the same thing what you see in ID. And then you can also, there's a very interesting feature that I saw, you can pass in git blame -m source script JS to see what are all the copied files that is in the, sometimes we copy lines from another place and paste it here, paste, and we move around in different places. To see that, you can see use git blame -m, which will show all the copied lines. Another thing, so sometimes your bug is very difficult to find out, and sometimes you have had a working version at some point, and you introduce a lot of new changes committed a lot of times, and then you realize, okay, there was a bug somewhere in between those commits. So you can use git bisect to do a binary search, and to do a binary search, and you can flag the commits as bad or good until you find the first bad commit. So yeah, so these are the ways that you can um, you leverage Git to come find a bug. And the fourth point I want to show is an associate can come in handy. So if you're really struggling, you're not finding where the issue is, it's always a good idea to pair up with one of your teammates. Every time a second pair of eyes always helps to spot the bug easier. So yeah, so even you can see how Kulfaro has a Captain Hastings on his side all the time. So the fifth is capturing the culprit. So how can you do that in code? So you can do error handling. So have some try-catch statements whenever you find a bug and do some handling there. You don't want to throw up just errors to your users, right? And you can also add a lot of unit test cases to capture those bugs so that it won't happen again. And also, if we have this unit test cases in the first place, we could avoid a lot of bugs even in the first hand. And thirdly, you can also add some end-to-end test cases uh, to just to make sure that all the logic and the flow is working. So, and you can also add, it's also very good idea to have a monitoring tool to find out if there are any more errors happening in your production code. Sometimes you just miss out on certain things and the errors will happen in production. So it's always good to have some monitoring tools like Datadog or Snook. So with that, let's see what we learned. First is approach is looking for clues and what are the how you can look into the console errors, and then collecting witness statements, cross-checking the browser system, and then narrowing down the suspect list, and use some techniques using DevTools and Git, and then finally capturing with some tests and error handling. So with that, if you have any questions,